Hello and welcome to everyone, both online and in person, to this installment of the Lunchtime Seminar Series here at the Hong Kong Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences. I'm Ghassan Moazi, an assistant professor here at the Institute. Today we're very happy and grateful to have as our speaker our very own director, Professor Chen Zhiwu. Professor Chen is not only the director of the Hong Kong Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, but also was chair professor of finance and Chen Yudong professor in finance at the University of Hong Kong. And of course, before coming to HKU, he was professor of finance at Yale University for a long time. His research covers many areas, ranging from finance theory to the sociology of finance to economic history, and in particular, of course, recently quantitative history, for which he recently won a very large research grant from the Hong Kong government. Today, he will be talking about a new paper of his titled War and the Origins of Chinese Civilization. Before I hand things over, just a few to Professor Chen, just a few words about the format. So Professor Chen will first talk, and after his presentation, we will have some time for Q&A. For those of you that join us in person, of course, you can just ask questions as usual, and one of our students will hand you a microphone, and then you can ask the question. For those of you in the audience on Zoom online, please submit any questions you might have through the Q&A button in Zoom, and then I'll read them out for the benefit of everyone here. So if you're ready, then please feel free to start.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Ghassan. Welcome to the Institute, especially to those of you who don't come here so often, because usually, I guess, especially during COVID, May Hall is pretty quiet, so we don't get too many visitors. So at least a few of you have come today in person, so this is a big plus to us. Of course, this topic is joint work with Joy and Peter Turkin, and then Wanda in the audience. It's more or less a derivative product out of our ongoing efforts in quantitative history. Of course, for this line of work, we have included a lot of the archaeological data, as you're going to see. So first, why are we interested in this question? So here, let's look at this interesting map. This map is not too complicated. We just divide the landmass of today's China into 1004 grid cells of 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers. I know this is not something historians do so often, but in physical science and geography and archaeology, this is very commonly done. Partly because, if we divide China into prefectures, then what prefectures do you use as the basis? Because of the different dynasties, the administrative zones have been drawing and redrawing many, many, many times. So in order to make the research sort of more independent of special imperial zoning practices, let's just divide everything into cells. So the blue color cells stand for the number of archaeological sites that have been excavated or discovered and included in archaeological reports. So the color, the density or the intensity of the blue color stands for the number of archaeological sites that have been reported for each given cell. So you can see, roughly speaking, a lot of the dark cells lie in the north of China. So you can roughly draw this line from here. This is where the Yangtze River goes, starting from here, where Shanghai is today. Hangzhou is about here, and then going across the Jianghan Pingyuan, the Wuhan
mid-Yangtze River area, going all the way up to the upper Yangtze River, entering this zone where the Chengdu plain is located. Okay, but you don't see many dark blue zones south of the Yangtze River. Okay, but you do see a very big area of a lot of dark blues. Okay, that's it. If we, as we do in a different paper, we basically establish this close correlation between archaeological site density for a region and the actual population density, especially when we use the Han Dynasty data, because that's the first historical period for which regional population estimates by historians are now available. So prior to the Han Dynasty, it's tough. But also for that period, we have archaeological reports on sites and so on. So when we looked at the two quantities together, archaeological site quantity on the one hand from archaeologists, and then historical population estimates by historians, when we put the two together, the correlation is very high. So that gives us a lot of confidence for basically viewing the archaeological density, archaeological site density as a proxy for the population density during prehistoric times when nobody actually gave any population estimate, as you can imagine. Okay, so the blue colors stand for the number of archaeological sites, which can be viewed as an approximation of the population during the Neolithic period, from about 10,000 years ago all the way to 3,700 years ago. So over that period, so you can see that most of China's population, if we can say it that way, during the historic periods, okay, prior to 1300 BCE, were located. Much of the population was located in northern China, not so much in the south. Okay, and then the yellow dots, the yellow circles, stand for the number of walled cities. So I'll be more specific later on, but for now, let's just view those walled cities or 古城邑 as those that had some physical structure encircling or protecting the population within. Okay, so we require either a physical mud-made or earth-made wall, or some moat, some water moat encircling the inner population so as to protect them. So you can see that, of course, the size of each yellow circle stands for the number of walled cities or walled towns that have been discovered for each cell for the whole Neolithic period. Okay, so you see a lot of big yellow circles here, and in other regions, and especially in the standalone region, the Chengdu plain, Chengdu Pingyuan, but no yellow circles south of the Yangtze River. Okay, so this is why when you look at, if we take this conclusion as a given that early Chinese civilization started in the Neolithic when walled cities or fortified settlements emerged. So we, in general, in this literature of archaeology, we view especially the emergence of very large walled settlements as the start of early civilization. So I'm going to get back to this in a moment. If we take this as a given, then the first impression we get from this map is that the Chinese civilization initially did not start in the south, but in the north. So for our effort in this project, the main question is not to identify evidence that the Chinese civilization started in the north, not in the south, because it's so obvious, right? The Physically, geographically, all the yellow circles, based on all the archaeological discoveries so far reported, all of them lie in northern China, not in the south. So that's obvious. But more importantly for us, the question is really to understand why the Chinese civilization started in the north. Even though we look at this map, we know it started in the north. But the question is, what made the north so different from the south? Okay, and then if we say it's the flat plains in northern China that gave rise to the Chinese civilization, then what are the main channels that made the flat plains or flat regions in the north so easy to come up with walled cities many thousands of years ago? Okay, so that's the wall channel we want to examine. So in the end, the basic conclusion is that it is wall that made Chinese civilization first emerge in the north, which basically says, the northern people in the prehistoric times must have faced a lot more war threats than the southerners. So I'm from the south. So if you ask me, why are you interested in this question? So I'm from the southern barbarian region of Hunan. So we were viewed as barbarians, right? So I want to understand why we were barbarians for so many millennia, whereas things were really cracking up and developing in the north. So let me first summarize the main findings from this work. So first of all, during the Neolithic, lower terrain ruggedness, so basically it means flatter regions, had more archaeological sites, so basically higher population density, and also more walled cities. So we just saw this a moment ago. And then secondly, flatter regions also had more military grave artifacts based on the archaeological discoveries so far, which indicates that there is a strong link between war and the start of the civilizational process in the north. Okay, and then to confirm this war channel, we use both military grave artifacts and also actual war data to prove that flatter regions indeed had more wars, especially during the Eastern Zhou period, Dongzhou, which caused the locals to build more fortified settlements or fortified cities. Okay, so since the north had flatter terrains than the south, and then they faced more wars, so the Chinese civilization originated there rather than in the south. So basically, the main conclusion is that warfare, not flood or irrigation control needs, that started the Chinese civilization in the north. Okay, so just let me spend a few minutes on the background in terms of the motivation for this research. So for us, one key question is, what drove the emergence of civilization, not just in China, but also in other regions, especially Mesopotamia. So here, just very quickly, for definitional purpose, so we define civilization to mean a collection of cultural, social, and organizational innovations that collectively establish a law and order. So this is the main key element we look for, law and order. And that makes peaceful interpersonal cooperation possible, okay, in a complex society. So as Durant puts it, civilization begins where chaos and insecurity end. So from his comments and discussions, it's very clear that what we mean by civilization has this key element that is law and order. that makes chaos and insecurity disappear or be lowered. Okay, so there is a relatively large literature on the origins of the state, the political state and civilization. But much of the discussion in the extant literature is really focused on the origin of state polities, not so much the origins of civilization. So as I'm going to show in a moment, the early emergence of civilizational development happened much before the first rise of large-scale political states. Okay, actually, in terms of the delay in timing, we're talking about several thousand of years. Okay, so not just the time gap is not just in terms of decades or centuries. So the early emergence of cities was much before the early emergence of the large political state. Okay, but nonetheless, this literature is very relevant to our work here. First of all, in explaining what contributed to the early rise of the political state or civilization, as they emphasized. Of course, for a lot of the early scholars doing work in this area, they really treat civilization as the same thing as political state organizations. So we try to make a distinction. Okay, first humans had cities. And then some thousands of years later, so chiefdoms and large-scale political states emerged. Okay, so in between, civilization actually started. In any case, Wittfogel, the German scholar in the 1950s, became famous for writing his books and articles by addressing hydraulic civilizations. So he's the one who gave this hydraulic needs or irrigation interpretation to explain why civilizations and political states first emerged. The main point is very simple. So when you had a lot of farmers who depended on water to grow their vegetables and crops and so on, then some leader had to appear to make sure that everyone would follow certain norms and rules. Otherwise, the local farmers would keep fighting with each other to get more water supply for their fields, right? So you needed some civilizational development to establish law and order so that water management can be done better. But here again, including recent efforts by Bob Allen and others, the focus has been on explaining what contributed to the rise of the political state. And then, of course, in political science, Charles Tilly is famous for creating this hypothesis: war made the state, and the state made war. And then after his work in the 1970s, there has been a huge literature on trying to reject his hypothesis or trying to support his hypothesis. But here again, it's about the rise of the state, not the rise of the early civilizations. Okay, and then Peter Turkin, he has published a number of papers and books to come up with this alternative explanation, that is advancements in military technology and also war threats from the nomads living on the steppes. They were the main drivers of very large political state development. But in their case, they really focus on huge political polities rather than early cities, and also their time period is from 1500 BCE all the way to 1500 CE. And then recently, among economists, there's this interesting paper by Mayshaw and his co-authors published in 2021, where they use the perishability of domesticated crops as the main driver for the emergence of civilizations, or more specifically for the state. So their explanation is that, if the local farmers grow crops that can be dried and stored for a number of years, then protection of private property would become more important to the local farmers. Whereas in Madagascar and other places where the domesticated crops were tuber and other perishable goods that cannot be stored, then there, even though the locals may have settled down to engage in farming and so on, there was not as much need to develop, very sophisticated law and order as a result. In Madagascar and other African societies, some of the tribal people may have settled down some thousands of years ago, but they did not have as much of a need to develop very sophisticated law and order and related institutions. But of course, their argument does not really apply to China, because the regions we are looking at, northern China and southern China, all grow either rice or wheat, millet, and other crops. All those things can be stored after being dried for some years. So perishability is not a main factor. So in any case, this large literature is focused on the origins of the state rather than origins of early civilizations. So here, I want to just cite a few papers, a few books to highlight the point that the emergence of early cities really was a major starting point to jumpstart the civilizational process. So thanks to Samuel for recommending Louis Mumford's book, The City in History. So he made a lot of wonderful observations. So here I quote a few lines from his book. The wall was both a physical rampart for defense and a spiritual boundary of even greater significance, for it preserved those within from the chaos and formless evil that encompassed them. The city, almost from its earliest emergence, brought with it the expectation of intensified struggle within. 1,000 little wars were fought in the marketplace, in the law courts, in the ball game, or the arena. The point here is that once you have a lot of people living in Hong Kong, right, in such a high density, you better have some law and order. Otherwise, the local Hong Kong people will just keep fighting with each other day in, day out in almost every place. So that's why, as we're going to see, even though the formation of early walled cities may be purely for the purpose of protecting the locals against enemy attacks, but once you have hundreds or thousands of people living within a very small fortified walled area, then you create what Mumford would call the struggles within, because in the marketplace, in the law courts and other places, you better have someone to enforce rules. Otherwise, there will be so much violence, so much disorder, and so on. This is why the original purpose of forming those walls may be for defensive purposes, okay? But once you have those encircled or fortified settlements formed with people living in, then they got a life of their own. They got new challenges, and then they had to develop new rules and engage in hierarchical administrative structure creations so that law and order can actually be maintained. Okay, so by putting power in some measure at the service of justice, the city brought order more swiftly into its internal affairs. So this is like a very nice summary of the main argument we put in here. That's why I really think that the association of the early emergence of walled cities with the early emergence of civilization makes a lot of sense. I mean, of course, you have to read more in this area in order to really appreciate this connection. Okay, so of course, for our work, then our key question is what caused the city to emerge in the first place? So here are the different hypotheses, but in the interest of time, let me just move on to the actual work we do. So we want to address two key questions. First, what made walled cities and then hence early cradles of civilization emerge? And secondly, why did they mostly emerge in China, in North China, over several millennia prior to 770 BCE? So just a very, very quick historical background. Okay, so you all know that sedentary agriculture started between 10,000 and 9,000 years ago in different places along both the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. But for the early Neolithic period, from roughly 8,000 to 5,000 BCE, about 13 very small walled cities or walled towns emerged. They were all very small, just typically in terms of a few thousand to a few tens of thousand square meters. So not big. Just, of course, this Mayor Hall building has maybe how many square meters? Is that maybe a secret of Hong Kong use? Anyway, maybe a few thousand square meters with all the rooms, Carl's rooms, Samuel's rooms, my rooms, all included, maybe a few thousand square meters. Okay, so we would not call this a city. Okay, but by the mid Neolithic, which goes from 5,000 to 3,000 BCE, archaeologists typically refer to that period as the Yangshao period. Okay, so this period had more interest in development. So far, 56 walled cities or walled towns have been discovered. So by the mid Neolithic, there are now 5 walled cities of at least 1 square kilometers in size. So when Wanda and I were first working on our first paper, I thought 1 square kilometer, that's too small. And then last year, we went to Jerusalem. I mean, some FBE colleagues and alumni and a few professors, we went to the city of Jerusalem. Then I saw that the whole city, the ancient city of Jerusalem, is 1 square kilometer in size. Then I thought, whoa, 1 square kilometer can be so big because there are many buildings in it, and also different segments of the Christian area, and then the Islamic or Muslim area, and so on, and the Jewish quarters, right? Wow, 1 square kilometer can actually accommodate a lot of people. Anyway, by this period, there are 5 walled cities of at least 1 square kilometer. So let me give you some examples just to appreciate what our ancestors were able to do with stone tools. Remember, those were not the Bronze Age times or Iron Age times. The reason we call it Neolithic because they did not have any of those metal weapons or tools, only stone tools. Okay, so this is from my hometown province, Hunan, not where I grew up. Okay, I'm from the southern Hunan, which is much more backward. Okay, but in the whole province of Hunan, there's only one plain That plain lies in Lixie, in actually along the border between Hubei and Hunan, above the Dongting Lake. Okay, so this is one of the relatively large-scale first walled cities. It's called the Chentousan site, or Chentousan walled city. Okay, it has 180,000 square meters in size, lying on the only plain in Hunan from this mid-Neolithic period between 5,000 and 3,500 BCE. So you see, how impressive it is, right there. There are moats encircling this central area, but inside the moats, there is this wall encircling, so to provide really double security. Those walls are pretty thick, okay, very wide and very tall. Just imagine how much work it must have been to use stone tools to actually dig out so much earth and build layer after layer those walls just to make sure that the people living within would be safe and protected from enemy attacks. But the social complexity at this time was still very low, pretty much flat society, because so far archaeologists have not found a lot of signs from the material remains indicating, stratification across the different classes and leaders, and then they ruled and so on. And also there was not as much division of labor or specialization of production. So here is another example from Henan, the Shanxi site. This is pretty small, 34,500 square meters in size. But the structure is very similar to the one we just saw from the period a couple of thousand years earlier. So there is a moat out layer or out wall or outer fortification, and then the mud wall encircling the living area. So here the wall is so far estimated to be 265 meters long, 3 to 5 meters wide, 1.75 to 2.5 meters tall. Okay, so it's even the shortest segment is taller than me, 1.5, 1.75. Okay, and then the moat is also a pretty big moat, encircling, and then 2 big gates. So it looks very close to, very similar to a modern city, so to speak. But again, social complexity and social stratification levels were still pretty low. And then if we move on to the late Neolithic, then things got a lot more interesting. So by this time period, there are 128 walled cities that have been discovered. Of those 128, 13 walled cities had at least 1 square kilometer in area, and 9 of them had more than 2 square kilometers in size. So here is a good example from this late Neolithic period, Taosi, in today's Shanxi province. This is one of the large late Neolithic walled cities. It has 2.8 square kilometers in area, and then very complex hierarchical social structure. So you can see from this map made by archaeologists, so far 6 palaces have been found, lying in the center here. And then next to the palace area is this section for mid-level elites to live in. And then above that, the palace area is the commoners' residential area. And then this area is for storage. and then craft production area was done here, and then burial grounds and cemeteries were divided according to social status as well. Anyway, so there's a lot of clear division of labor and separate production zones. Some for later on for metal manufacturing, and then some for craftsmanship, and some for storage, and then especially when they looked at the burial objects in the different graves and tombs, only less than 1% of the graves would have tens or dozens or hundreds of objects to go with the buried. But more than 90% of the graves would have no burial objects to accompany the dead. So inequality in wealth and in social status is very clearly there. So that's why by this time of development in the late Neolithic, cities and chiefdoms or different kingdoms clearly were there, and social complexity reached a very big, very high level. This is why archaeologists typically view this period, the late Neolithic, as marking the true beginning of the Chinese civilization. Okay, so basically the logic goes like this. On the one hand, once fortification was formed, then you would create high population density societies, and then that demanded, demanded for governance. Okay, to establish law and order. On the other hand, just for the simple the scale of constructing those walls and moats, it required some leaders to have the ability to mobilize the people and to get all the people to do what they were asked to do, and also mobilize enough resources to be able to complete those big projects at a time when the tools available were all rocks or bones for them. Okay, so in any case, that made the social stratification and administrative hierarchy became a necessity. Otherwise, they would not be able to amass the kind of resources and mobilize so many people to do the work. Okay, for our statistical or quantitative analysis, now let's move on to the real thing. Okay, so the main outcome variable for us is the number of walled cities in each cell of 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers. The main periods we look at the whole Neolithic, and then the late Neolithic, and then the Eastern Zhou period. The main explanatory variables include terrain ruggedness index. So each cell, so now actually with a lot of data available, especially from the US Geographic Service, we can map and measure the unevenness of this mountain just behind us. You can actually get very fine data. And then military grave goods from the archaeological reports, and the number of walls for each cell. Okay, actually have to move faster. All right, so this is what the results, I mean, the spatial distribution looks like for walled cities during the Neolithic and then during the Zhou Dynasty period, and then ruggedness levels for the different cells. So again, the darkness of the green color stands for the unevenness or ruggedness of each cell. So the light green stands for pretty flat regions, and then the lighter greens here stand for somewhere in between the light green areas and then the dark blue areas. The dark blue areas are much more mountainous and more uneven. So you can right away see that somehow all those yellow circles most of them lie on light green areas. They lie in light green areas for this Neolithic period. And then for the whole Neolithic period, as I mentioned earlier, no walled cities have been found for southern China. Okay. But by the Eastern Zhou period, somehow civilizational development finally extended to some of the southern areas, but not as far as where we are in Hong Kong or Guangdong. So anyway, so Guangdong, as you know, was not part of China per se until the Qin founding emperor, and then during the Han Dynasty and so on. Okay, and other data, let me just skip them. Let me show you the main results. So first, let's look at what we get when we regress the number of walled cities for each cell on terrain ruggedness for that cell. Either using terrain ruggedness as its independent variable alone or together with others, or have ruggedness index interacting with the archaeological site density for each cell. Then we see the coefficients being statistically significant. And then, so basically, without spending too much time here, the takeaway is that flatter regions, so which means low ruggedness levels, have a negative sign here, which means the more rugged an area is, the fewer walled cities there were during the Neolithic period, right? But when we interact these two terms, archaeological site density, so which basically means population density for that area. So this coefficient is negative and statistically significant as well, which means, for regions, for flat regions with high populations, then they faced a stronger need to build fortification to protect themselves, because when we compare two areas or two regions, one is very flat, the other is very rugged. Okay, so the people living in rugged mountains, they would have natural protection provided for them. They would not need to make the efforts to build artificial walls to protect themselves. But those who were living on flat plains, unfortunately, flat plains would make the locals so exposed to enemy attacks. So remember, for fighting a war, right, the most difficult thing or the biggest challenge would be to manage the logistics. First, you have to be able to send your troops there. Secondly, you have to give them food and other things, right? But just imagine sending a big army to a flat plain to fight a war. Then you would say, wow, no problem. It's so easy. We can just go there. We don't have to have a lot of healthy soldiers who can climb mountains. But imagine then sending the same army to a very mountainous area like the mountain behind us, right? Then you need healthy hikers and runners anyway. And also you cannot carry many things. So this is why what we get here for flat, high population regions, you have to build more artificial walls for defensive purposes. That's really not a surprise. But for mountainous areas, no such need. So this is why, to me, Guangdong and southern Hunan and Jiangxi and Fujian did not really have to form kingdoms or early on walled cities. No need, because the mountains gave us natural protection. But actually, that convenience early on turned out to hurt us in the long run, because we had no need to engage in complex society governance, innovations, and so on, right? So this is why Southern Chinese did not really participate so much in the early civilizational development because we were actually hurt by the early convenience of relying on natural mountains for protection, whereas the northerners, Zhiwu Chen here, he's from Shandong, his ancestors did not have that luxury. They had to work hard to build artificial walls. Yes, back then it was hard work, right? But actually that unintentionally turned out to help his ancestors to start the civilizational process early on. Okay, so that's the basic logic there. But of course, seeing that correlation it may not impress you because you may say, yeah, from the first chart, we saw that all the early cradles of civilization appeared in the north, not in the south. Of course, then you should see this correlation between the two. But more importantly, we're interested in why the flat regions started the Chinese civilization early on. So we look for the wall channel as an answer. But as I said earlier, we don't have specific data for each region's number of walls during the Neolithic period. So we have to look for a proxy. So that's why we end up looking at military grave goods that have been uncovered by archaeologists for each region. Just very quickly, some of you may wonder, talking about Stone Age, right? So what kind of tools could actually be considered as weapons for the Neolithic farmers? Well, they look like this. Okay, this is from a grave marked as M2001. So that's what archaeologists use to refer to specific graves from Taosi, again, from that very mature, relatively mature, well-developed region. From this, a number of bone daggers were found. They look like this, made of either animal bones or human bones. And then stone knives, there are 3 of them. This one here. And then a bone arrowhead is not showing this picture. And there are also more sophisticated weapons that have been uncovered from Taosi graves. Those are very nice jade battle axes. I know many of you may be wondering how lethal can they really be? I guess depends. And then the stone axes and then bone arrowheads, just to give you some idea. But then at the Song Dynasty period, between 3,600 years and 3,050 years ago, okay? So now bronze weapons started to appear. But all these weapons that are made out of bronze came from Sichuan, okay, near Shanxingdui, not from the Shanxingdui sites, but from this side, Laolongtou graves in Sichuan in the plains. But they look a lot more like swords and spears with modern people see. But by the Eastern Zhou period, then everything looks a lot more familiar to us, to modern people. Okay, this is of course from the famous Qin Emperor's tomb. Okay, chariots, as Shen Hao would like to emphasize. By this time, towards the end of the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, weapon, the most modern, up to state-of-the-art weapons would be the chariot. Okay, and also a lot of cavalry tools have been uncovered. Anyway, these pictures hopefully give you a sense of the evolution of military weapons from the prehistoric period to the early historic period for China. So we're trying to write a book to show all the different things. Okay, what do the weapons distributions look like across China during different times? So for the Neolithic period, the weapon the military grade goods are distributed mostly across northern China, just with very few from graves that have been uncovered in the south. Okay, but by the Eastern Zhou period, then you see even more concentration of the weapons. Of course, some of you may wonder, why are you guys looking at military weapon grave goods? Here is the simple logic, for people in any locality to care about weapons so much, they must have experienced a lot of wars. So war fighting must have been so important to the livelihood of the people in the local population, right? Otherwise, why would they care about weapons so much that before they died, they made sure that all their relatives would know, well, after I die, okay, make sure, let me take some weapons to my grave, okay, because I care about those weapons so much, okay. So this is why in the South, in the Neolithic, not many people cared to carry weapons into their graves. Whereas in the North, they cared a lot. Of course, in other work we're doing, we looked at the distribution of jade and other wealth symbolizing grave goods. You can guess most of them came from southern China, especially from the southeastern corner. Anyway, it's so interesting to look plot those charts. Once you have a lot of data, you can show the geographical distributions, and then by looking at the evolution of how the distributions have changed, you can really learn a lot about how China came to where it is today, starting from 10,000 years ago. Anyway, so now we do a two-stage exercise. So first, we regress the number of military grave goods on ruggedness and other explanatory variables for the first stage regression. So what we see is that the more rugged a region is, the fewer military grave goods to be uncovered. So that shows that flat lands had more need to fight wars. So as a result, they developed more likely they developed a warrior culture very, very early on, many thousands of years ago. Okay, whereas for the mountainous or rugged regions, the development of a warrior culture almost never took place, even today. Actually, in another study where we look at the number of martial arts schools today per million population across China. Well, the difference is so huge. Okay, mostly in southern China, even today, people don't bother to send their kids to martial arts schools and military schools, whereas in those in these areas, they still do even today. So the warrior culture still goes on there anyway. So, and then for the second stage regression, then we use the ruggedness for each cell to predict the number of military grave goods. So the predicted value is then used in the second stage regression to predict how many walled cities were formed during the Neolithic period in that cell. So the coefficient is positive and statistically significant. Okay, so I'm almost running out of time. Let me move on. So this is based on military grave goods. But then, as I said, for the Eastern Zhou period, we have specific war data estimated by historians. So instead of trying to use military grave goods as a proxy for war frequency in a region, we use wars, the number of wars for each cell during the Zhou period, and then do a similar exercise. Actually, just very quickly, the density, the density of the red color stands for the number of wars in a cell during the Eastern Zhou period. So the darker the red color, the more wars the locals experienced during that time. Just look at where the dark red cells are located, all in northern China. Okay, so the poor northerners, they had to deal with wars for so many millennia. So that's why I don't blame them. They had to form cities. They had to build walls to protect themselves. But fortunately, because of their doing that, as I said earlier, they jump-started unintentionally the civilizational development there. Okay, so you can roughly see what we're going to get, because based on the actual wars for the Eastern Zhou period, the statistical results are even much stronger because of the maybe higher data quality or higher quality data we have. And then lastly, we run this horse race exercise to see what hypothesis or what factors have the strongest power to explain the emergence of the early cradles of civilization. So then what we find, not surprisingly, is summarized here. The wall channel fully captures the effect of terrain ruggedness on city formation. So in other words, once we include the wall variable and the wall channel in the regressions, then the significance of ruggedness level disappears. It's totally submerged or captured by the wall channel. Okay, and this wall channel dominates the other factors such as irrigation control and threats from the steppe nomads from the north. So of course, one factor that has been popular in the literature remains significant, that is population growth. So this is first, this was first put out by Matthews. He made the point that people living a nomadic lifestyle would have much lower fertility than farmers who had a more stable food supply and hence could actually produce many more babies per woman. So that's why, when early farmers were able to have more children than the nomadic hunter-gatherers. So that gave rise to an increase in population, which later on gave rise to cities. But from our exercise, a lot of the statistical analysis, we see that just having a large population is not sufficient to guarantee that the locals would want to build a walled city. Okay, you needed something else. So that is the geographical feature of flat land would actually add this additional pressure to the locals to have to build protective walls to engage in this civilizational development process. So in short, so war is actually the main trigger for the development of the Chinese civilization. So that's what main takeaway from our exercise. Okay, hopefully that gives us that takes us a little bit further in our understanding of the origins of civilization, both in China and elsewhere. Okay, so that's what I have. Okay, sorry that I took the whole hour. Right? Okay, let me stop here. Thank you. Thank you. Do I have time for?
Of course. Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Chen, for the wonderful talk. So we have some time now for questions and answers. If you are in the audience here with us in person, then please just make yourself known, and we'll get a microphone to you so you can ask a question. If you are online, then please submit a question, submit your question through the Q&A button. Oh, we have a question at the back.
Gunther, yeah.
Hi, Günther. I just wanted to ask about the proportion or the count for the way that you calculated the military artifacts in the graves. Was that done using the absolute value, like the count, or was it proportion of all the artifacts that were found in the grave site? Because it might reflect like the relative importance rather than the absolute. So yeah.
Yeah, we use the
logarithmic value of the count, of military grave goods.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Proportion.
Yeah, Wanda and I, we talked about using the ratio between the number of military goods and the total number of graves that have been excavated for the cell. Yes, yeah, we will try that. Yeah. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions here? Oh, Samuel.
Yeah, Sam. Yeah.
Like observation actually, but in Mesopotamia actually, which is about same latitude, which is about same latitude as the northern so-called actually this between the Yangtze River and Yellow River. That's where also the initial actually urban civilization took off. And similar actually they developed the irrigation system, and also that's the fourth millennium actually BC. They have the that like the rural actually in third millennium, and then were in these early cities actually emerged. I think that probably would be good actually to conduct like a similar kind of quantitative actually research to see actually whether that geographical actually the features will contribute to that.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So the similarity between Mesopotamia and China is very high. So I don't think for Mesopotamia, hydraulic control or irrigation control was the main driver for the initial emergence of walled cities. So Mesopotamia, the first cities were all walled with all big walls as well. In the literature, they say that for Egypt, the early motivation may be slightly different because they did not, the cities that first came up there did not all have big walls to protect themselves. Of course, in the European experience, walls were there from the very beginning, from the Roman times, and then during the Middle Ages. Then if we look at any of the war movies, right, they always had big castles and walls. So for many parts of the world, the early motivating factor had to do with war and walls. The same as in China in the early days. Of course, for China in the early history, after China became one unified country, then the reliance on big walls became much lower. But prior to the Qin dynasty, walls were much more common among the high population centers.李老师。
我就用中文问一个问题啊，陈老师。
OK，
我想可能在网上也有中文的观众啊。就是在这个计算的过程中间，一个呢就是我想到了罗同学刚才问的问题，就是这个数量和这个比例之间，可能更多的时候比例可能会makes more sense 一点。这是一个，其实已经问了啊，就是我算是回答我的疑问。另外一个问题就是说，我们知道南方地区事实上是平坦的地方是比较少的，这样的面积是比较小。那么相应的，它的绝对人口数量可能是比较少的。那么在这个时候呢，比如说我们考虑的时候，算这个过程中间是不是需要考虑人口密度？比如说战争的频率，或者说这种武器出现的频率和人口密度之间的关系。
Yeah, thank you. So Dr. Li is an archaeologist from the Institute of Archaeology at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. So we're happy to have him visiting us for the next 6 months. So he mentioned two things. One is we should try to use the ratio of the number of military grave goods and the number of graves. So we will try that. But actually, on this point, we did try to use a dummy variable
like for each cell, if there was any grave military grave good that has been found, then we assign a value of 1 to that dummy, and then use this dummy variable to run the regressions. Then we get very similar results, not that much different. So that treatment or that research design can free us from the measurement errors in terms of the number or the actual number of military grave goods. And then the other point Dr. Lee mentioned is to use the population or the archaeological site number for each cell as the basis to determine the ratio instead of the number of graves. Yeah, we will try that too. We plan to do this. But from this dummy variable based exercise, I would say very likely the results will stay intact, not too affected. I mean, if we really step back and then see why the early farmers decided to build protective walls, right? Then we see that it's really not that surprising that wall is the main link in pushing, in pressuring the locals to build protective walls. So if that's the case, yeah, it's not surprising that when we use the number of military weapons in the graves as a proxy for war frequency in the region during prehistorical times, then we get very positive results. So that should not be surprising in a major sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a few questions online, so I thought I'll start with one. So Matthew Nullett asks, how do you control for environmental conditions that reduce the likelihood of preservation, like the wet south, where archaeological artifacts are less likely to survive, or sociocultural factors like extensive use of perishable materials like bamboo or loess soil in the north that make it easier to build walls, basically?
Yeah, I did not mention the additional controls in our exercise. We have included the suitability of the local soil for rice, and then the suitability level for millet, and the suitability level for wheat growth. And then we also included like the distance from the steppe. That's a proxy for the threats from the northern nomads. I forgot to mention that we don't see any significance for this distance from the steppe to explain the number of walled cities. So from our exercise, it seems like until the Warring States time, until about 2200 to 2700 years ago, the threats from the nomads was a non-issue for our prehistoric ancestors. For them, the threats from the more immediate tribes probably were the real concern for them. So this is why when we controlled for distance to the steppe, and then we also controlled for the precipitation level, because initially we want to use the level of rainfall in a region as a proxy for the need to control irrigation, because if they had too much water, like in Hong Kong, then the need to control water flow would go higher. Of course, on the other hand, if there's too little rainfall, then water would become more precious. So that may also capture a different kind of need for irrigation control. But we have so far not found the level of precipitation for a region to be significant in explaining the number of walled cities. So other geographical factors, I don't know what others, maybe, the distance to major navigable rivers, like the Yangtze River and the Yellow River, they capture partly the need for irrigation control as well. For the Eastern Zhou period, this became a significant factor. Let me see. Actually, in the two stage regression is not significant. Yeah, the distance to the major rivers, it's not significant either. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any more questions in the audience here? Oh, yes,
I
please,
think,
yeah.
I think everyone is tired. Yeah.
Third year PhD in economics. A question is about climate, because when people talk about the transition of economic center from North to South in the past 2000 years, like people talk a lot about climate. It's basically about China getting cooler and cooler, making the South richer and richer and the North poorer and poorer. So, because in the eyes of the preaching people themselves, like the southern area was not just not suitable for building cities or fighting wars, but it was just not suitable for people to live. So like I see you control precipitation in the regressions, but I'm not sure if it is sufficient for like controlling climate factors.
Yeah. Like this distance from the steppe. In some ways, that's also a proxy for what you are talking about, right? Because the south is really far away from the steppe, whereas the north is much closer. For some of the regressions, the distance from the steppe turned out to be significant, but it has the wrong sign. Supposedly, the further away from the steppe, we should see fewer walled cities, but actually it's the opposite. So I think there's something that is something that indicates that the work published by Peter Turkin and his co-authors in PNAS and Nature is more for large scale state polities, but not for the early emergence of walled cities. So there were very different drivers for the early emergence of civilization than the drivers for the enlargement, development of already big scale state politics. Yeah. So anyway, so we can try out other things in this project too. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Professor Liu. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. It's very powerful argument. I really, it's really provoking to me. But anyway, just two very sort of just curiosity. Number one is about both of these questions are on the prehistory side, right? Not on the later part.
Yeah.
For the Neolithic period, sort of military grave goods. Of course, we see those things are weapons, where you can say, axe, knife, and so forth. But how about another sort of function for those things, apart from being used in war to kill people? How about hunting?
Yeah.
Or for animals? Well, it can be threat from animals. So that's one question. Is about the weaponry, but the function of the weapon, not the later ones, but definitely the stone tools. The other thing is really, I think, is a curiosity, really curiosity. I never thought of this, but it just hit my mind because you're thought-provoking about war city, about war city or walled settlements in the Neolithic period. Of course, immediately, I would agree with you that it is for defense against sort of enemies, threats, and so forth. I fully agree with you. But how about in some cases, is it possible that it's also for the function of how to say management of the flooding? So geographical factor you mentioned about the rainfall. Rainfall may not be a matter of the I would say the agricultural production, but also a matter of flooding. Because I don't know, I thought there was a lot of flooding in Yellow River in particular. The high concentration of the sites as really as historically what we understood was a lot of flooding there. So is it possible that this kind of mounted kind of wall is also have some function of I mean, just a flooding purpose, something like that. So I don't know, just to curiosity.
Yeah, that's one alternative interpretation archaeologists have been debating on quite a bit, even in Dr. Lee's own work, because his work is more focused on like the mid Yangtze River, like Jianghan Plains area. Yeah, so there, he talked about the hypothesis that flood control may be a major motivation behind the construction of the walls and moats. Personally, I think if we look at the geography of the surrounding areas, it will be much easier to just move to a little bit higher segment of the local hills, right? Than to construct those walls, because to me, especially given the technologies available to them, it was much harder to build the walls to protect themselves against flood than to just move everywhere. After all, for the early Neolithic and mid-Neolithic people, they had not lived a settled way of life for too long. I mean, moving around to them was not such a strange thing, So I think, yeah, it's hard to, I guess, now to come up with the kind of evidence we have here. Maybe someone can construct an alternative X variable to explain that those high walled city density regions really faced a lot more flood threats. Because anyway, because of X, Y, Z, and so on. Yeah, of course, definitely, you're all welcome to try that. But so far, I'm convinced by our evidence that war is the main motivation. And then, Professor, so you're totally right. For the Neolithic period, the classification of these weapons or those tools into weapons as opposed to production tools, is debatable in some cases, right? Like this, it could be used to cut trees, to clear some area in order to plant rice or millet plants. But I guess probably, especially in the Stone Age time, dual or multiple uses of the same tool should be pretty common. So maybe for some. Maybe that's why these regions did have some graves with military goods, even though the locals at the time may have really used those tools for production purposes, not for defense purposes. But that should help strengthen our argument. So the South did not have much urge or desire or need to engage in city formation and then, governance management, because the population density was not that high. And also they had mountains to protect themselves very naturally. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Samuel.
I just wonder whether why actually in China, this complex society only began to emerge in late Song period, almost towards the end of the Bronze Age, whereas in Mesopotamia actually already began to emerge towards the end of the 4th millennium. You have a similar kind of emergence of early proto-cities or villages. And wall cities, actually, the wall settlements, they do not necessarily indicate they are cities. Actually, like Jericho, they have, 8,000 BC already have, walls. So I just wonder why actually in certain kind of, in China case, actually, complexities of society and cities, so-called, why actually this quantitative actually accumulation of settlement began to cross that quantitative boundary, becomes true city, just like Leisang, like Yanshi, Haosi, and Yinxi, actually these cities, actually why it only occur in that period of time.
Yeah, so this is the Haosi, right? I forgot to mention the construction of this long wall. Look here, this thing. the big encircling wall. The encircled 2.8 square kilometers. These are big walls too. So it's really, I mean, that's still the Stone Age, the Neolithic period, not so bronze, especially for Shanxi at that time. Probably so far, of course, some archaeologists like Zhiwu Chen would like to say, out of one of the graves near around Taosi, there was one little thing that was made of copper. So now archaeologists have been really excited to try to do more, or especially to find more such copper tools, because if it is true that this period during this period in Shanxi, bronze tools were already made and used, then that may tell us something different about the history and early introduction of bronze technology into China, because now there's a lot of speculation that bronze technology was not a native invention in China, rather it came from the West. So this is why earlier I was showing this tools, yeah, because during this even during the Shang Dynasty period, there are many more bronze tools that have been uncovered from the graves in Sichuan, but much fewer from other regions. So it seems like more evidence is pointing in that direction. So anyway, but I think the complexity of Taosi is already very high from all the different perspectives. So I think maybe, of course, I'm not hired by the Chinese government as part of this origin of the Chinese civilization project. I'm totally independent. My interest into this was totally random, because a few years ago when we held our summer school for quantitative history in Henan, so one of the attendees was a PhD student in political science at Tsinghua. So he had been working on ancient city or prehistoric cities of China. Then he gave a presentation, so I asked him, what other archaeological data and reports we can find. He said, oh, nobody has collected all the different archaeological discoveries to form any database or data set for us to use. I said, wow, how come? Because over the last few decades, the construction and infrastructure projects have accidentally discovered so many archaeological sites. So there are so many reports, but not many people have tried to collect all the data together and do some low-hanging fruits type of analysis. So that's why I got interested in this area, especially anyway. So to China now, we have been using more modern Chinese historical data to do analysis, but sometimes, so this kind of work got me in to ask more questions and answers, because what made the different regions different 500 years ago? Then we had to go back to the Tang Dynasty, and then what made the different regions so different at the beginning of the Tang Dynasty? So then we had to go back further to the Axial Age, and then what made the different regions so different at the beginning of the Axial Age? We have to go back even further anyway. So this is how sort of, as a finance professor, I have sort of randomly wandered into this area. There was no design, no plan by anyone or me. So that's why I don't believe in planned economy, right? So a random walk style of professional life is good. Yeah. Hey, Dr. Lee.
Yeah, talking about the emergence of the walled cities or walled towns, there's one thing I'd like to remind me actually, especially when I was doing field work in the Jianghan Plain. you know, when we are talking about those, I think we need to look at these wards, towns or centers very closely and carefully, because the reasons, the driving force for the emergence of those walled towns can be quite different from one to another one, from the towns to towns, from town to town. Especially when I was surveyed the two towns, I mean, including the Xiaocheng和陶家湖, you know, probably you already mentioned that two towns. We talked about that before. I realized the Xiaocheng town and the Taojiahu town, they emerged probably, I mean, driven by different force. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, when we talk about a lot of the world cities or towns, we probably need to be careful about those. We need to look at that. We probably need to scrutinize the closely.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, from one case to another, they can be easily other factors, other drivers. For example, you know, if the local soil quality is so sandy, then anyway, it may not be so easy at all to build walls using sand, right? So they did not have cement at that time. So, but other areas, yeah, they anyway. So different factors for sure have played roles. But of course, from our perspective, we look for the most common driver that may be at least true for most of the cases, if not for all the cases. Yeah. Thank you.
I think in the interest of time, maybe a final question that we have online that goes into sort of what you just mentioned in terms of collecting data. So this comes from Michael Rivera and colleague of ours at HKU, and he says, I'm really impressed with the scope of the coverage. Can you please give more of a sense of the preparation, expertise, and human hours needed to compile and analyze so much data? And what have the main constraints and pressures been, and what are the main challenges now in this later stage?
Yeah, well, thank you, Michael. Yeah, we have spent almost the last 5 years collecting all the reports and going through all the items that we are interested in. So for more than 4 years, most of the time we had about 100 research assistants from archaeology departments in many universities on the mainland, and also archaeological museums in different provinces, because a lot of the young scholars so nicely offered their time and joined our teams. Yeah, so it was a very large effort. I mean, so Beth can testify how I've spent a lot of my research budget on this for the last almost 5 years. So this is not an easy project. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. So we continue to collect more data because from last year to early this year, we updated the database to include the most recent reports from 28, covering those reports released between 2018 and 2022, to at least to cover everything that has been released by the end of 2020, and some recent ones have been added. And then we're collecting other data sources as well, including data for historical periods. So we want to, you know, make the figures and charts continue to include all the historical periods as well. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Unless there are any final.
Just one answer. Actually, I just wonder whether what role religion actually plays in the formation of this complex society. Just wonder whether there are data collected for that. And some of these actually jade instruments actually use, it looks like they're for ceremonial rather than for utilitarian purposes.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, like for the jade
axis. Some archaeologists would classify them as more like ceremonial objects. During later times, during the early and mid and late Neolithic period, that luxury was not something to be had, especially by the more common people. Of course, for the kings, or rulers, it may have been a somewhat different story. But for other people, it would be too much a luxury to have. Yeah.
I just want to know whether they will be too fragile if you use that as a tool. Because in Mesopotamia, they use they choose particular kind of a stone for this kind of if it's for cutting. Rather because they are not as fragile, particular.
Yeah, well, then the other way around to look at this is what other choices did they have, right? I mean, especially like for people living like in southern Hunan, I would say in those days, in the prehistoric times, there were not too many nice to manipulate stones available. So what could they do? I mean, jade was not in the natural endowment of Hunan. Those few stones available were not so easy to manipulate. So whatever they could do at the time, is what they could do, right? What they would do, yeah. I think that's why bone tools were more common probably at that time. Some of the bones, some of the animal bones could actually be so sharp and also so lethal when used as weapons, yeah. And also those those bone tools are much easier to manipulate or change or sharpen than stones. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Ghassan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel.
So please join me all in thanking Professor Chen for giving this.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So we would like to welcome more people to join us here at the Institute to do this kind of work and other kind of work. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. Thank you.